In the heart of the Pacific Northwest lies Blackwater Forest, a dense, sprawling wilderness known for its towering pines, thick underbrush, and eerie silence. The forest is vast, stretching for miles in every direction, and its dense canopy blocks out most of the sunlight even during the day. At night, the forest is pitch black, with only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. It's a place where the air feels heavy, and the silence is so profound that every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig feels magnified. On the night of October 12, 2021, a night security guard named Tom was patrolling the perimeter of a private logging site within the forest. Tom had been working as a security guard for over a decade, and he was no stranger to the strange occurrences that seemed to plague Blackwater Forest. Over the years, he had heard countless stories from the loggers, tales of strange lights, unexplained noises, and even sightings of a massive, shadowy figure that roamed the woods. But Tom had always brushed them off as campfire stories, the kind of tales people told to pass the time during long, lonely nights in the forest. That night, however, Tom's skepticism would be put to the test. It was around 11:45 p.m. when Tom noticed something unusual. He was driving along the dirt road that circled the logging site, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was rough, lined with deep ruts and potholes, and the truck bounced and jolted as he made his way around the perimeter. As he approached the eastern edge of the site, he saw something that made him slam on the brakes, massive footprints leading from the edge of the forest toward the logging equipment. Tom got out of his truck, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the prints. They were fresh, the mud still soft and wet, and they were enormous, at least twice the size of a human foot. The prints were deep, as if whatever had made them was incredibly heavy, and they led in a straight line toward the heavy machinery parked near the edge of the clearing. Tom's heart began to race as he shone his flashlight along the trail of prints, following them back toward the tree line. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Tom radioed his supervisor, his voice tense but calm. "I've got something out here," he said. "Footprints. Big ones. They lead right up to the equipment." His supervisor told him to stay put and keep an eye out, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As Tom continued his patrol, the unease grew. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. The air grew colder, and Tom could see his breath forming clouds in the moonlight. Around 2 a.m., he heard it, a low guttural growl coming from the trees. He froze, his hand on the radio, and shone his flashlight into the forest. The beam caught something moving just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the light like a predator's. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he radioed for backup, but his voice was barely a whisper. The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. Tom could hear its heavy breathing, see the steam rising from its nostrils. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring directly at him before letting out a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the forest. The sound was deafening, a primal scream that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Tom's feet. Tom didn't wait to see what would happen next. He jumped back into his truck and sped away, his heart pounding in his chest. When backup arrived, they searched the area, but the creature was gone. All that remained were the massive footprints and a strange, foul smell that lingered in the air. The next day, the company brought in a team of trackers and wildlife experts, but they found no trace of the creature. Some of the older loggers told Tom stories about the Watcher in the Woods, a legendary creature said to protect the forest from intruders. To this day, no one knows what Tom encountered that night, but the experience left him and the entire logging crew forever changed. Ravenswood Asylum, abandoned since the 1970s, is a crumbling relic of a dark past. The building is massive, with long, winding hallways, broken windows, and overgrown vines creeping up its walls. Inside, the air is thick with dust, and the floors are littered with debris, broken furniture, rusted medical equipment, and faded patient records. The asylum has been the site of countless paranormal investigations over the years, with reports of strange lights, unexplained noises, and even sightings of shadowy figures roaming the halls. On the night of March 8, 2022, a night security guard named Sarah was patrolling the empty halls of Ravenswood Asylum. Sarah had been working at the asylum for 3 years, and she was no stranger to its eerie atmosphere. She had heard the stories, tales of patients who had died under mysterious circumstances, of doctors who had performed unethical experiments, and of the countless souls said to haunt the building. But Sarah had always been a skeptic, dismissing the stories as urban legends. That night, however, her skepticism would be put to the test. It was around midnight when Sarah heard the first sign of trouble. She was walking down the old patient ward, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hallway was lined with rusted beds and broken furniture, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. As she passed one of the rooms, she heard a faint whisper, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. She turned around, but the hallway was empty. Sarah tried to brush it off, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like they were right behind her. She spun around, her flashlight sweeping the area, but there was nothing there. The unease lingered as she continued her patrol, the whispers following her like a shadow. Sarah decided to check the security cameras. As she flipped through the feeds, she noticed something strange in the old operating room. The surgical table, usually covered in dust, was spotless, and the instruments were arranged neatly on a tray, as if someone had just used them. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the screen. She grabbed her radio and called for backup. But before she could say anything, the lights went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over the asylum. Sarah heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from the direction of the operating room. She shone her flashlight down the hallway, and that's when she saw it. A figure dressed in an old doctor's coat was walking toward her. Its face was pale and gaunt, and its eyes were completely black. The figure stopped, staring directly at her, before taking another step forward. Sarah didn't wait to see what would happen next. She ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. She didn't stop until she was back in the security office, her heart pounding in her chest. She locked the door and watched the cameras, but the figure was gone. The next day, Sarah asked her supervisor about the asylum's history. He told her that the operating room was the site of numerous experimental surgeries and that several patients had died there under mysterious circumstances. Sarah quit the next week, but the experience left her forever changed. To this day, no one knows what she saw that night, but the legend of the ghosts of Ravenswood Asylum continues to haunt those who dare to enter its crumbling halls. In the outskirts of a small, forgotten town stood the remains of the old Grayson textile factory. Once a bustling hub of industry, the factory had been abandoned for over 30 years, its towering brick walls now crumbling and its windows shattered. The building was a labyrinth of rusted machinery, broken conveyor belts, and dark, narrow hallways. Locals whispered about strange occurrences at the factory, lights flickering in empty rooms, distant screams echoing through the night, and shadowy figures seen wandering the grounds. But no one dared to investigate until the night of November 15th, 2022. The factory's owners had hired a night security guard named Mike to patrol the property and keep out trespassers. Mike was a retired police officer, a no-nonsense man in his late 50s who didn't believe in ghosts or urban legends. To him, the factory was just another job. a way to pass the time and earn some extra money. But that night, the factory would prove to be far more than he bargained for. Mike arrived at the factory just before sunset, his truck crunching over the gravel driveway. The building loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the fading light. He grabbed his flashlight, radio, and thermos of coffee, then made his way to the security office, a small, dimly lit room near the front entrance. The office was equipped with a bank of monitors showing live feeds from the factory's security cameras, though many of the cameras were old and glitchy. Mike settled in for the night, sipping his coffee and keeping an eye on the monitors. The factory was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the monitors and the occasional creak of the building settling. But as the hours passed, Mike began to notice something strange. Around 11:30 p.m., Mike saw movement on one of the camera feeds. It was in the factory's main production floor, a vast open space filled with rusted machinery and broken equipment. The camera was grainy, but Mike could make out a figure moving slowly between the machines. He grabbed his flashlight and radio, then headed out to investigate. The factory was pitch black, the only light coming from Mike's flashlight. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was littered with debris. As he made his way to the production floor, he heard a faint sound, a rhythmic tapping, like metal hitting metal. The sound grew louder as he approached, echoing through the empty space. When Mike reached the production floor, he shone his flashlight around the room. The machinery loomed like silent giants, their shadows stretching across the floor. The tapping sound stopped, and the room fell silent. Mike called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice echoed through the factory, but there was no response. As he turned to leave, he heard the sound again, this time directly behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, he thought he saw something move, a shadow, just beyond the edge of the light. But when he stepped closer, there was nothing there. Mike returned to the security office, his unease growing. He kept a close eye on the cameras, but the figure didn't reappear. Around 2 a.m., he heard a new sound, a faint, high-pitched whine, like the sound of machinery powering up. The noise seemed to come from deep within the factory, and it grew louder with each passing second. Mike grabbed his flashlight and radio, then headed out to investigate. The sound led him to the factory's basement, a dark, damp space filled with old boilers and pipes. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the floor was slick with water. As Mike descended the stairs, the whine grew louder, almost deafening. At the bottom of the stairs, Mike saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the old boilers was running, its gauges spinning wildly and steam pouring from its valves. The machine hadn't been operational in decades, but now it was alive, its metal groaning under the pressure. Mike backed away, his flashlight beam shaking as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Suddenly, the boiler exploded, sending a cloud of steam and debris into the air. Mike was thrown backward, his flashlight skidding across the floor. As he struggled to his feet, he heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from the darkness. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the sound, but the beam caught only shadows. The footsteps grew closer, and Mike could feel the ground vibrating beneath him. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. The factory seemed to come alive around him, the walls creaking and the floors shaking. He didn't stop until he was back in the security office, his hands trembling as he locked the door. Mike spent the rest of the night in the security office watching the cameras. The factory was silent once more, but the unease lingered. The next morning, he reported the incident to his supervisor, but an inspection of the factory found no evidence of the boiler running or the explosion. The basement was exactly as it had been for decades, cold, damp, and lifeless. Mike quit the next day, but the experience left him forever changed. To this day, no one knows what he encountered that night. But the legend of the silent intruder continues to haunt the old Grayson textile factory.